Namaskar students, how are you? Hope you are hale and hearty, taking care of your health and your studies. I know you were waiting for this video, so here we are with an all new video. So, today we are going to take up chapter number 1 from grade 8 history book Our Past part 3. The name of the chapter is How, When and Where. When we talk about history, history deals with the past. What is past? Past is something which has happened with us probably yesterday or an year ago or maybe 10 years ago. So any event which has happened with you becomes part of the past. So let's analyze, study what's there in past for all of us. So, talking about the past, there was a time when historians were fascinated with dates. There were heated debates about the dates on which rulers were crowned or battles were fought. In the common sense notion, history was synonymous with the dates. You may have heard people say, I find history boring because it is all about memorizing dates. Is such a conception true? History is certainly about changes that occur over time. It is about finding out how things were in past and how things have changed. As soon as we compare the past with the present, we refer to time. We talk of before and after. Living in the world, we do not always ask historical questions about what we see around us. We take things for granted, as if what we see have always been in the world we inhabit. But most of us have our moments of wonder. When we are curious and we ask questions that actually are historical. Watching someone sip a cup of tea at a roadside tea stall, you may wonder, when did people begin to drink tea or coffee? Looking out of the window of a train, you may ask yourself, when were railways built and how did people travel long distances before the age of railways? Reading the newspaper in the morning, you may be curious to know how people got to hear about things before newspapers began to be printed. All such historical questions refer us back to the notions of time. But time does not have to be always precisely dated in terms of a particular year or a month. Sometimes it is actually incorrect to fix precise dates to processes that happen over a period of time. People in India did not begin drinking tea one fine day. They developed a taste for it over time. There can be no one clear date for process such as this. Similarly, we cannot fix one single date on which British rule was established or national movement started, or changes took place within the economy or society. All those things happened over a stretch of time. We can only refer to a span of time, an approximate period over which particular changes became visible. Why, then, do we continue to associate history with a string of dates? This association has a reason. There was a time when history was an account of battles and big events. It was about rulers and their policies. Historians wrote about the year a king was crowned, the year he married, the year he had a child, the year he fought a particular war, the year he died, and the year next ruler succeeded to the throne. For events such as these, specific dates can be determined. And in history, such as these, debates about dates continue to be important. You must have seen in the history textbook of past 2 years that historians now write about a host of other issues and other questions. They look at how people earned their livelihood, what they produced and ate. If you closely look at the first picture given in the book, we can see that Rennell was asked by Robert Clive to produce maps of Hindustan. An enthusiastic supporter of British conquest of India, Rennell saw preparation of maps as essential to the process of domination. The picture here tries to suggest that Indians willingly gave over their ancient texts to Britannia, the symbol of British power, as if asking her to become the protector of Indian culture. Moving over, we see in figure 2 the advertisement. In this, we can see an old advertisement which help us to understand how markets for new product were created and new tastes were popularized. This 1922 advertisement for Lipton tea suggests that royalty all over the world is associated with this tea. In the background, you see the outer wall of an Indian palace, while in the foreground, seated on the horseback, is the third son of Queen Victoria of Britain, Prince Arthur, who was given the title of Connaught, the Duke of Connaught. How cities developed and markets came up, how kingdoms were formed and new ideas spread, and how cultures and societies changed. By what criteria do we choose a set of dates as important? The dates we select, the dates around which we compose our story of the past, are not important on their own. They become vital because we focus on a particular set of events as important. If our focus of study changes, if we begin to look at new issues, a new set of dates will appear significant. Let's take an example. In the histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each Governor General was important. These histories began with the rule of first Governor General Warren Hastings and ended with the last Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten. In the separate chapters, we read about the deeds of others: Hastings, Wellesley, Bentinck, Dalhousie, Canning, Lawrence, Lytton, Ripon, Curzon, Harding, Irwin. It was a seemingly never-ending succession of Governor Generals and Viceroys. All the dates in these history books were linked to these personalities, to their activities, policies, achievements. It was as if there was nothing outside their lives that was important for us to know. The chronology of their lives marked the different chapters of the history of British India. In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, published a massive 3-volume work, A History of British India. In this, he divided Indian history into 3 periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. The periodization came to be widely accepted. Can you think of any problem with this way of looking at Indian history? What do we try and divide history into different periods? We do so in an attempt to capture the characteristics of a time, its central features as they appear to us. So the terms through which we periodize, that is, demarcate the difference between periods, become important. They reflect our ideas about the past. They show how we see the significance of the change from one period to the next. Mill thought that all Asian societies were at a lower level of civilization than Europe. According to his telling of the history, before the British came to India, Hindu and Muslims, despots ruled the country. Religious intolerance, caste taboos, and superstitious practices dominated social life. British rule, Mill felt, could civilize India. To do this, it was necessary to introduce European manners, arts, institutions, and laws in India. Mill, in fact, suggested that British should conquer all the territories in India to ensure the enlightenment and happiness of Indian people. For India was not capable of progress without British help. In the idea of history, British rule represented all the forces of progress and civilization. The period before British rule was one of the darkest. Can such a conception be accepted today? In any case, can we refer to any period of history as Hindu or Muslim? Did not a variety of faiths exist simultaneously in these periods? Why should we characterize an age only through the religion of the rulers of the time? To do so is to suggest that the lives and practices of others do not really matter. We should also remember that even rulers in ancient India did not all share the same faith. Moving away from British classification, historians have usually divided Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. This division too has its problems. It is a periodization that is borrowed from the West, where the modern period was associated with the growth of all the forces of modernity, like science, reason, democracy, liberty, and equality. Medieval was a term used to describe a society where these features of modern society did not exist. Now let's take up the colonial. You'll see how Britishers established control over the economy and the society, collected revenue to meet all their expenses, bought the goods they wanted at lower prices, produced crops they needed for export, and you will understand the changes that came about as a consequence. You will also come to know about the changes British rule brought about in values and taste, custom and practices when the subjugation of one country by another leads to these kinds of political, economic, social, and cultural changes. We refer to the process as colonization. You will, however, find that all classes and groups did not experience these changes in the same way. That's why the book is called Our Pasts. In the plural, administration produces records. Let's take it up. One important source is the official record of British administration. The British believed that the act of writing was important. Every instruction, plan, policy decision, agreement, investigation had to be clearly written up. Once this was done, things could be properly studied and debated. This conviction produced an administrative culture of memos, notings, and reports. The British also felt that all important documents and letters needed to be carefully preserved. So they set up record rooms attached to all the administrative institutions. The village tehsildar's office, the collectorate, the commissioner's office, the provincial secretariats, the lower courts all had their record rooms. Specialized institutions like archives and museums were also established to preserve important records. Letters and memos that moved from one branch of administration to another in the early years of 19th century can still be read in archives. You can also study the notes and reports that district officials prepared or the instructions and directives that were sent by officials at the top to the provincial administrators. In the early years of 19th century, these documents were carefully copied and beautifully written by the calligraphists. That is by those who specialized in art of beautiful writing. By the middle of 19th century, with the spread of printing, multiple copies of these records were printed as proceedings of each government department service became important. The practice of serving also became common under the colonial administration. The British believed that a country had to be properly known before it could be effectively administered. By the early 19th century, detailed surveys were being carried out to map the entire country. In the villages, revenue surveys were conducted. The effort was to know the topography, the soil quality, the flora, the fauna, the local histories, and the cropping pattern. All the facts seen as necessary to know about to administer the region. For the end of 19th century, census operation were held every 10 years. These prepared detailed records of the number of people in all the provinces of India, noting information on caste, religions, and occupations. There were many other surveys like botanical surveys, zoological surveys, archaeological surveys, anthropological surveys, forest surveys. So, what did the official record tell us? For this vast corpus of records, we can get to know a lot, but we must remember that these are official records. They tell us what the officials thought, what they were interested in, and what they wished to preserve for posterity. These records do not always help us to understand what other people in the country felt and what lay behind their actions. For that, we need to look elsewhere. When we begin to search for these other sources, we find them in plenty, though they are more difficult to get than official records. We have diaries of people, accounts of pilgrims and travelers, autobiographies of important personalities, and popular booklets that were sold in the local bazaars. As printing spread, newspapers were published and issues were debated in public. Leaders and reformers wrote to spread their ideas. Poets and novelists wrote to express their feelings. All these sources, however, were produced by those who were literate. From these, we will not be able to understand how history was experienced and lived by the tribals and the peasants, the workers in the mines or the poor on the streets. Getting to know their life is more difficult task. So, how was it? I hope you enjoyed. You know, our past gives us a very clear vision for our future and a very strong foundation for our present. Let's try to analyze what have we learned from today's chapter. So, here are some questions. If the statement given below is true or false. So, James Mill divided Indian history into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, Christian. This is a wrong statement. James Mill divided Indian history into Hindu, Muslim, and British. Next, official documents help us understand what the people of the country think. This is also wrong because official documents help us to think what the officials at that point in time thought. Moving on, the British thought surveys were important for effective administration. Yes, the British believed that surveys were important for effective administration. Okay, if I have to ask you what is the problem with the periodization of Indian history that James Mill offered, what would it be? You might say that James Mill divided Indian history into three periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. This periodization has its own problem. it is difficult to refer to any period of history as Hindu or Muslim because a variety of faiths existed simultaneously in these periods. It is also not justified to characterize an age through the religion of the rulers of the time. What it suggests is that the lives and practices of others do not really matter. It is worth mentioning that even rulers in ancient India did not all share the same faith. Custard apple is related to botanical gardens. Okay, now there are 4 options on your screen. You have to pick one. Goddess Dash was a symbol of British power in India. Correct. Britannia. Dash was the first Governor General of India. Lord Dalhousie, Lord Canning, Warren Hastings, or Robert Clive? Very right. It was Warren Hastings, who was the first Governor General of India. A History of British India was written by Nicholas Louis, Clive Lloyd, James Mill, or John Henry. A History of British India was written by James Mill. According to Mills, all Dash societies were of lower level. According to Mills, all Asian societies were of lower levels. National Museum is located in Delhi, Kolkata, Madras, or Shimla. National Museum is located in Kolkata. British introduced practice of dash to know about rural topography, judiciary, revenue collection, surveying, or mapping. And the correct answer is surveying. Britishers introduced practice of surveying to know about rural topography. I hope today's session was very fruitful for you. We'll be back with another video. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep studying. Namaskar.